No, you cannot? No. Well, I'm going to come closer then. On behalf of the Jefferson School Speakers Program, the E. Claiborne Robbins School of Business, and the Department of Speech, Communication, Theater, and Dance, I'd like to welcome you to today's campus conversation. We are addressing today the question, is there a crisis in eloquence? This question and our discussion was prompted by the book, The Inarticulate Society. The author of that book, Mr. Tom Shachtman, is a featured guest on our panel today, and he will be introduced by our moderator, along with our other panelists. We are grateful for you being here today, and thank you for joining us. Our moderator today is Mr. Lou Dean. You may recognize the name. He is a commentator and popular host of the newsroom program on WRVA Radio. Mr. Dean will be moderating the conversation, which will begin as a conversation among the panelists for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then we're going to invite your questions and your participation. Please do not be hesitant. We would love to have this truly be a campus conversation. You will, if you will, direct your questions to Mr. Dean or raise your hand and look his way so that he can recognize you, and then you can address your questions to whomever or to the panelists as a group. We would also invite you to stay for the reception, which will take place at 4:15, and the book signing over at the entrance. Mr. Shachtman will be signing copies of both his Inarticulate Society and his newest book, Around the Block, which has been critically acclaimed by the Washington Post, New York Times, and The Economist magazine, among others. If you are here in connection with a course and need to sign an attendance sheet, those are also at the door. So if you have not signed one already, please do so before you leave so that your presence can be noted. And without further ado, welcome, Mr. Lou Dean. If you would like to stand up there, you can turn on the mic or greet me from right here.
I'm sure you can hear me from where you are. In deference to Randy, I will not talk about chicken and dumplings. In case you don't know, I do the newsroom program on WRVA. It's a program very similar to All Things Considered, and it deals with the news of the day. I cannot tell you specifically what will be on the program tonight because it will deal with the day's news, but I can tell you some of the things it will not deal with. Former Surgeon General Everett Koop has said that he does not want to be buried in Arlington National Cemetery, especially since he's still alive. And as you probably know, Washington National Airport has been renamed for former President Ronald Reagan. And their new motto is, we haven't lost your bags, we just forgot where we put them. I want you to realize that the only reason I did that is so that you will take part in this discussion. It's a free-for-all. It's an opportunity to meet a gentleman who has thought long and hard on the topic we're about to address. Let me introduce the panelists, and I'm sure you know them. Dr. Anne Perkins, Associate Dean, Jefferson School of Leadership Studies. Dr. David Thomas, the Chair of the Department of Speech, Communication, Theater, and Dance. And Dr. Ellis West, Professor of Political Science. Our guest is Tom Shachtman. I met him by radio, by telephone, a couple of years ago. He is the author of some 24 books, a writer of award-winning television documentaries. He taught writing for many years in the undergraduate film and television division at New York University. And I have to tell you, I think of myself as fairly articulate, doing a radio program, and yet I was intimidated when I talked to him by telephone because I thought he was going to grade me. And I said, good afternoon, and I was wondering what he would make of that. But this book, I think the thesis in the book is a very interesting one, and I freely admit, having read the book, that you may not agree with it, and that's fine. The author is here to talk to you, to convince you to his side of it. Let me introduce Tom Shachtman. And Tom, let me ask you, first of all, why did you write on this topic? Obviously, it was something you felt strongly enough that you wanted to put it in a book. You might want to come up here, okay, at least for that presentation.
Actually, I've been trying to think about why it was that I started to write this book. I thought for a long time that it was because of something extremely wonderfully dumb that had been said to me in a class at NYU. I was teaching a screenwriting class, and I had a young lady there who wrote in a screenplay that Mayor Frank was emitted to the hospital today. That's E-M-I-T-T-E-D. And this was a pretty smart young lady. She'd been through some good high schools, one of which I knew was on Long Island, and I knew where she came from and what her preparation was. And she was at New York University, which has reasonably good standards for admitting people. Not emitting people, but. And this was not a freshman course. This was, I think, sophomore or junior course. So I asked her if we could just at least talk about these. And we finally got down to figuring out that she'd never actually seen the word admitting in print, but that she'd heard it from a number of our local news broadcasters, and she heard the word as emitted, and that's why she wrote it down that way. And this began to get me thinking about the difference between the things that we say and the language that really has to do with the language of writing. And so I always thought that was the reason that I began to write this book. But now that I've had a few years away from it and begun to think longer about it, I've come to the conclusion that I wrote this book because in my house when I was growing up, I have one sister, and she's almost totally deaf. But my parents made a fundamental decision sometime in her childhood, her early childhood, that she would enter the world of the hearing and not the world of people who sign. There were many fewer people who signed in the 1940s, and it seemed like the logical thing to do. Today the decision might have been different, but nonetheless my sister speaks, and she speaks extremely well for somebody with the degree of hearing difficulty that she had. Nonetheless, it becomes clear to me now in retrospect that every word that was said in our house, because of my sister's hearing difficulty, every word was very important. So we had to be extremely clear in what we said, and direct, and not mumbling and rumors and all of that, which I generally do when I'm talking to people in conversation. But the most important thing, I think, was these words, and to be concentrating on what it is we had to say and how we were going to say it and what we wanted to do with the words that we said. So I think that's really the reason that I began to write this book. And I must tell you that it's a labor of love. As somebody who makes his living from writing, I have to dance along a line that really consists of what I want to do versus what I can get the publishers to pay me for. And if I were willing to write about the sex lives of the rich and famous, I might be among the rich and famous. Not necessarily among the sexy, but at least among the rich and famous. So to write books like The Inarticulate Society without any visible means of support, such as being able to teach at a university on a full-time basis, or having poor parents who were smart enough to make a lot of money and leave it to me, really means that I wanted to write the book, and it's a passion with me, something that I developed over the course of years, I think, in the process of doing a lot of writing. And I've discovered, I think I have discovered anyway, that there is really a gap between the language that we have at the forefront of our brain, which may consist of about somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 words in our vocabulary, and the vocabularies that we command when we sit down to write and when we seriously think about writing something, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 15,000 words. Now, just to put this into perspective, there are about 500,000 words in the Oxford English Dictionary. And Shakespeare, who used more words, I think, than anybody else who ever wrote, used somewhere around 30,000 to 35,000 words. But you, who are sitting there, are probably in the neighborhood of 10, 12, 15,000 words that we use all the time in writing. But we don't always use them in speaking. We used to use a lot more of them in speaking than we do now. And our vocabularies are shrinking. That is, the vocabularies that we speak in ordinary speech. Sitting and talking to somebody, you're having a particularly erudite discussion for which you have prepared for a number of days, you're probably using 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's the correct amount of vocabulary to be using there. But yet we seem as a society to be losing the ability to speak correctly and to use words properly. One of the things that I did, analyze words of the CBS Evening News, as spoken by Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, and various other people. And one of the reasons I did this was because I worked at CBS for 3 years, from 1966 to 1969, when I was about 4 years old. And I loved it. I worked at a Tele 321. So all it is somewhere, and of course I wouldn't get them on the first try. I'd leave my number and I'd say, and give you a dumb number. So anyway, I consider it. And yet, but when I came, I feel very sure it was back to over a year, declining in the amount of vocabulary, declining adequacy of the insight of what we're on. And Peter Jensen seems to be pretty, and if you talk to him, he'll be erudite. I was this then gather and crowd. And then about 2 weeks ago, I heard I've seen versions of this headline recently. Peter was on the evening news and he said, it has two problems, Monica Lewinsky and Saddam Hussein, Monica Lewinsky. And the hair on the back of my neck went up. And I said, wrong. And the reason I think it is, but by saying it, he's intimidating all of us, is a mode where we apprehend the crises in the wrong way. To say he has a problem with Saddam Hussein and Iraq, not Bill Clinton. The United States has a problem. May well have Lewinsky to equate metaphor by the central Lewinsky Saddam Hussein is to not only do it president, but also to the presidency and to the country, to you and us in the audience, because we are getting the wrong message and we are live and reforming it as the wrong. And this is, I think, part and part why we are becoming the inarticulate society. It's not you having inadequate preparation we have, but it's also a question of everything in our society conspiring against our ability to use our words and our mind, the way in which we fashion our thought processes, the proper way. And so that's part of the reason why I've called this an inarticulate society. I think with presentation, and we have bad preparation. It has to do with what's taught to us, how it's being taught. Most of the learning, again, doesn't happen in the classroom. It happens outside of the classroom. It happens because of the people we work with, among our peers. It happens because of the advertisement and the other broadcasts and CDs and other media that are thrown at us, everything that comes through to us. Lou Dean doesn't do a call-in program, but if you've ever listened to call-in program on the radio and have to commute more than 7 minutes, has probably done that. Cannot but recognize the incredible amount of anger out there and inarticulate mixed together. People would at least gather their thoughts before they call in and spew out over their prejudices, not their rationalities, but their prejudices. But all of this is in the air. It's on the air, but in the air. And it happens, you can pick up the New York Times, which ought to be the best paper in the country, and find not only plenty of grammatical mistakes, which are relatively easy to make, and I don't think terribly awful, although I like to not make them myself, and hope that none of you will ever make one again in your whole life. Until tomorrow. But also that the things are just sloppily written or badly written, or that the headline play havoc with what is being said in the article. I was in a hospital bed last week, and a friend of mine in Litchfield County Times in Connecticut asked me to write an article. So I said, well, just say something about President's Day. You're such a historian, you have this long. I said, okay. So remember, little beds is very conducive to good thought. So I wrote something essentially, who should we put on Mount Rushmore next? And personally, I would prefer to put nobody else on Mount Rushmore. Just leave those 4 guys alone. But I finally came up with a list of those 4 as the starting, the front line, and then 3 more from the 20th century. We'll take Reagan, since people want to put him up there anyway. And we'll take Woodrow Wilson, since I wrote a book about him. And we'll certainly take FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, where everybody agrees is the greatest president of this century. We'll leave off Jack Kennedy, because he's got enough monuments. And then from the 19th century, we can find a few more. Certainly Andrew Jackson and Madison and Monroe, and maybe we'll throw in Grover Cleveland, just for the heck of it. And in this article, I said, well, that makes the starting 11. But my friend, who is an editor who was a young woman who likes swimming, doesn't like football, didn't understand my metaphor. So she decided to edit this, and she said instead of the starting 11, she said, that's 11 to start with. Now what she's done is she's distorted my meaning here. And I have not tell her this because I want to keep her friendship and because she would be very embarrassed. But this is just part and parcel of what seems to me to be happening. And we have only one way to reverse this, and that is to try to put our brains in gear and to hitch our vocabularies to them and to try to say more of what we mean and mean precisely what it is that we say. In order to do this, we need to use those vocabularies that are sort of in the back of our minds and bring them more towards the front. And we need to practice it a lot. We need to get up in front of classes and take questions. We need to try and speak out. I think the movement called Speaking Across the Curriculum, which is not done at this college, but it's done at a number of other colleges, is a very important one. I think Linda's Speech Center and the work of the speech department is important here. It's not remedial work. This is not something that where we have not done a good job, we haven't learned how to add 2 and 2, and we need to have some remedial work. We just all need sort of general uplift. We can all get better at it. It's not just a matter of being able to present well, you know, to start off with a few jokes so we've got the audience on our side and then speak to them that they can understand. It's a question of being able to express ourselves. And as we go through society, and no matter in what position you are, whether you are a father or mother speaking with your children or your neighbors at a community meeting, or whether you're in a business situation, you're trying to assume a position of leadership, whether you're in politics, where you certainly need to be able to speak to people all the time and tell them precisely what it is that you want to say. All of these things require, and the shape of our society will continue to require, more and more presentation of articulate speech. You are not going to be able to hide behind the internet or communicate only through the internet. Some of the worst articulate speech that I've seen is in the internet, especially on chat rooms, the real-time kinds of services, because you're trying to engage your fingers quickly so you can answer whoever it is put up something impertinent there and do it quickly. A much better speech, if you take a look at it just from an articulate point of view, has to do with the bulletin board, because there you can spend 2 hours composing a 57-word missive and then put it up, and everybody will say, gee, isn't that articulate and intelligent? I wonder how I'm going to answer that. But that's the way we ought to be speaking anyway. We ought to be able to at least put a lot more thought to what we do. The title of this discussion is whether there's a crisis in eloquence. And I want to make a difference between eloquence and articulateness. And eloquence is the stars. Eloquence is what we reach for and try to accomplish and probably do once in a while. Articulateness is something that we need to do every day. We need to be comfortable with it. We need to be confident enough in our own ability to speak that we can say what we mean and mean what we say. And I think that anybody who does do those things, that is, say what you mean and mean precisely what you say, is articulate. And I hope that we can all do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Before I open it to the panel for questions, you are certainly starting beyond the point of forgiving mistakes and other malaprops and other mistakes.
I forgive nothing.
We're in trouble.
I have what's called Irish Alzheimer's. You know what that is? That you forget everything but the grudges.
Everything but the grudges. Let me open it to the panel. And everybody's looking at you.
Everybody's looking at me, I noticed that. And believe me, I'm extremely intimidated just having heard what you said. I was intimidated before, but now I'm really intimidated. I'm kind of like Lou. It's kind of like you're afraid to open your mouth because you know you're being graded. And now I know how all of you feel. It's terrible. But I do want to, actually, I had 2 questions that I wanted to ask, and I think I'm going to reverse them. Since you've already mentioned one that I refer to here. You write, from the example of our political leaders, people learn how not to say what they mean, and that it is acceptable not to mean what they say. It seems to me that this behavior is an ethical problem rather than one of articulate behavior. So how do you resolve an ethical problem through education for articulate behavior?
I think we learn how to lie in a lot of circumstances, and politics is full of evasions and full of euphemisms and so on. And we're beginning to see some of these in the presidential discourse about Monica Lewinsky and those problems associated with it. Sort of highlights it. I agree with you that there's an ethical difficulty here at the bottom of it. But there's sort of a habit of political speech, which is an indirect thing, and it's a way of avoiding consequences that doesn't always have to do with ethics. It's just a style. If you look at Harry Truman's speech, you see a man who was celebrated for his plain speaking. He's a person who never considered himself to be particularly articulate. And when he did employ speechwriters, they had to use his style, not theirs. And he wanted to be direct, and he felt that he was being direct. I don't always think that this is the case today. I think many politicians set out to take positions that are not assailable in one way or another. Because the worst thing that you can do is say, I don't agree with you, and what do you mean by that anyway? So I think there's a basic problem with political speech. And the reason why it's a problem for the rest of us is because whether we want to or not, I think we tend to mimic what our elected officials and our Hollywood stars and our sports heroes say and the way they say it.
You had another question.
I did, but I don't know if that's what I was following up with.
Can I follow up?
Yes. Please
Because
do.
in a sense you asked my question.
Oh, sorry.
But I want to press him a little bit here, okay? The distinction that Anne started out with, I think, is very important. That is, part of the problem is simply not being able to speak in an articulate and eloquent way. Another part of the problem is that people who can have the ability to do that, nevertheless intentionally do not do it, and who abuse their speaking, misuse their speaking. And in particular, Tom focuses on politicians as the example of that. And so as a professor of political science, I was particularly interested in that part of your indictment. My question, it's sort of a comment, maybe even a criticism of you, but it's ultimately a question. I don't see how really you can expect anything very much different from the way politicians speak or write, as long as we have the kind of both political and economic system that we have. By definition, in a democracy, the politicians have to get elected and re-elected, and in order to do that, obviously they feel like they have to do and say, whatever will get the votes. And that in turn is related to our economic system, which obviously is highly consumer oriented. We have goods and products to sell, and we will be willing to say and write anything in order to sell those products. It seems to me that insofar as we have an ethical problem with respect to the use of speech, it's endemic, it's systemic. So aren't you really just sort of crying here for nothing? I mean, can really anything be done about this with our present system?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that question. While you were speaking, it occurred to me that the real answer lies in looking at the '92 election, and where we had George Bush saying, in private as well as in public, that he really didn't understand why Americans wanted the vision thing. And as far as I understand the vision thing, from an audience's point of view, it's to tell us where we're going or where you want us to go, which is to say, to articulate a vision of America and the future that you will take us to, or that you feel we need steering in the direction of. And the unwillingness of the politician to even address this issue speaks to me to an unwillingness just to be a leader at all, and an unwillingness to accept the responsibilities that go with that. So if this is to say, well, there's an underlying moral crisis or something, I think that's true. Another thing that occurred to me while you were asking this question is, did we have to have the kind of State of the Union message that we recently had with Bill Clinton, and that we've had, by the way, going back through to at least the early '80s with Ronald Reagan, and perhaps back before that, which is a laundry list. I recently reread Jefferson's first inaugural address, which is, of course, not a State of the Union, but one of the most important things that he ever wrote, in which he articulates a very high-minded but very clear conception of where he wanted the country to go, what he thought needed to be done, how to heal the wounds that had come across. And this was the first election in which there were actually two contesting parties. And it's quite something. Now, in addition to being unable to compare Jefferson and Clinton, I think that there still is the requirement for our public officials. I don't see any reason why the State of the Union message has to be a shopping list, or have to be a way of getting applause every 17 and a half seconds. I think that the requirement is more on our politicians to provide the vision thing. And I see no ethical, moral, religious, or economic systemic reason why that would not play in Peoria. I think, to the contrary, that we have become used to not having it, but that doesn't mean that we still don't need it or couldn't use it.
Could I just follow up?
Yeah.
Sure.
And say that, you know, that sounds all well and good, but if you were in fact a politician and having to make the State of the Union address or make any other speech anywhere, you would probably be doing exactly what politicians today do. They have their pollsters, and I mean, you point this out in your book. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, of course. You have your pollsters find out first what it is that the people want you to say, so that then if you say it, then of course you will be popular and will in fact get votes. Now, I mean,
I agree, but I don't think that's the only necessary way to do it.
Self-interest here, it seems to me, is something you're not taking an account of. I mean, how could you expect these people to behave otherwise than in terms of what will serve their own self-interest?
I can expect them to behave otherwise because I want better. That's a perfectly good reason. You know, I mean, if there's no stars to aim at, why bother? You know, I'm not saying everybody has to be like Jefferson or anything like that. I do think, however, that a number of the people, I had the good fortune to meet George Bush as vice president in a less formal setting, and I had been to Nigeria, and we'd come back, and we were talking to him about something having to do with that, and he was terrific. He was well informed, he was articulate, it was just a pleasure to be with him and to speak with him. And I felt badly that he would not take it upon himself to articulate a vision of the future for the country, and to at least put that out there and let people accept, not accept, so on. I think it's a terrible state of affairs where we have to have our pollsters say what it is that we should be speaking about. The function of a leader is to lead. The function of a leader is to pierce the veil of the future and to take us to places where he or she thinks that we ought to be. And to me, that is part and parcel of being a I don't like the word politician. I think we have leaders of the political process. And we do expect them to be responsive to our concern, but we also expect them to be responsive to higher concern where we're wrong. Where if I'm saying, well, I don't want to pay such high taxes, I want a leader to be able to say to me, you actually don't pay high taxes compared to what they pay in Great Britain or Scandinavia or X, Y, Z. And therefore, kindly shut up and you know, accept that this is a good. I remember the songwriter Irving Berlin, who was born abroad and who used to consider it a privilege to pay taxes in the United States. Well, this is just completely unacceptable politically if you want to be reelected. Nonetheless, it might be interesting medicine for us to hear. So perhaps that isn't a question of being articulate. Perhaps it's a question of having courage. But nonetheless, you need to be able to, if you close this thought in the appropriate words, I think that you can get more people to follow you than you might otherwise. So certainly there is a systemic problem here, but I also think that part of the antidote is political courage and the speaking ability to be able to say it well enough and to get people to follow a better path.
And I think that's where I'm having my problem, is that I feel like that it's having an ethical grounding before you speak it. And I think that the way I am reading your book is that how we speak it is almost comes ahead of what our underlying belief system is. And I see the two going hand in hand. I don't see how we can separate articulate behavior from ethical behavior. But I don't think, and I think it's possible to have articulate behavior without ethical behavior, which I think we see articulate behavior among our politicians
Sure
from
we
time
do.
to time.
I think that there's really a problem of what I would call Western and Eastern behavior here. In Japan and in Asia in general, there's a great deal of credence given to outward form, and a sense that if you get the form correct, you'll at least have a leg up on getting the content correct. And we in the West tend to think if our heart's in the right place, then everything else will follow properly. And my guess is that it has something to do with both. And that I'm not asking people to be articulate simply for the sake of articulateness. I think people are happier when they're able to say what they mean and mean what they say, because then you get it out. I mean, we've all said in our lives, I don't know how to say this to you, but, and likely it is when we, give that preamble, which is warning, look beyond what I'm saying here to get to the truth of it. Then after that, we probably do speak fairly articulately and tell them exactly what we think. But I think that the outward form, the articulateness, the ability to command the vocabulary and to try and put forth your ideas in ways that have proved themselves to you to be meaningful and workable is as important as having your heart in the right place.
David?
Yes, thank you, Lou. Tom, the reason that I'm here, I'm sure, is because I represent speech communication. But I think the reason you are here today is because of speech communication, actually in the logistics of this thing. And it relates to this precise point that you're making right now. A few years ago, we were going through curriculum reform here on the campus, and the big issue was requirements, cutting back requirements. And as chair, I was trying to figure out ways that we could validate and justify speech communication. Your book came along at just the right time for me to change my perspective on how can we get students to take speech classes, to how can we serve the needs of our students to become more articulate citizens. And so my emphasis shifted from requiring speech to increasing speech opportunities, rather the model of speech across the curriculum than take a speech class. Speech as a delivery of scholarship in whatever discipline rather than speech as a skill that they don't have. So I thank you for your contribution to our thinking, and you should know that this book is now a requirement in Ms. Hopgood's class, and the Speech Center Act is a direct outgrowth of that very idea. Now, my question after that speech is not from your book, but from a news item that Judge Bork is now being quoted as saying that the reason that he is against a special prosecutor is not because Ken Starr is not doing his job well, which he's not, but the reason is because of the mentality that we need such an office to begin with, that there needs to be institutionalized a critic of the president. Whereas before, say in Nixon's time, the press did that criticism. It was Woodward and Bernstein who exposed Watergate, not a special prosecutor. And my question to you would be, how do you believe that this habit of political criticism can be moved back away from the institutionalized professionals into the citizens and the press?
Well, I think that the press is probably the key to it. I don't see, and my difficulty with the press is one of the reasons that I've never taken a daily newspaper job or aspired to having a daily deadline, which is because I think it's very, very difficult to do that and to bring to it enough perspective. I have a lot of friends who are newspaper reporters, a number of them Pulitzer Prize winners, and I'm in awe of them and their ability to do things. But the ones who are, I think, probably the best among them are those who refuse to have a daily deadline because they don't feel that they have enough background and knowledge or perspective to make commentary decisions on things every day. Have any of you watched the Fox News network? I think it's available in Richmond. Fox News is run by an old friend of mine, Roger Ailes, who's a former advisor to presidents going back to President Nixon, and mostly Republicans. He's somewhere to the right of Attila the Hun, and he and I have some wonderful political discussions on 3 different continents while we were doing documentaries together and so on. Now, the slogan of the Fox News Network is something like, we're going to present the news and no commentary, and we're going to leave it up to you to decide, which is all well and good, except that the people that Roger has hired are well known in the business to be not liberals. They're almost to a man and woman people who are sincerely to the right of center rather than to the left of center, or whose political affiliation is not known. These are people with declared political affiliation. So it becomes very difficult for me to accept that what is on Fox, simply because of the decision-making process and because of the bias of the reporters, is objective. I don't mind that it happens to be right of center because it may be a fine counterbalance to other networks and so on which are left of center. But I think it's a mistake here to say that it's objective. And so I think to get around to your question more directly is, I think we need to have in the press an ability to step back and look at and comment on what's going on. Maybe that means more columns and less reportage. I don't really know. Maybe it means, as done on some local news broadcasters, you have local news broadcast, somebody who gives the news, and then a super comes across them and says commentary, and it separates the commentary from what it is that is being given as news. We can only critique our public officials if we have the capacity to critique them. We can only, one of the reasons I wrote this article about who to put on Mount Rushmore is because we may have a feeling at the moment that our presidents, and certainly the last few, have not been terrific. But my point was, if you look at a 200+ year period of history, you'll find that we have at least 11, perhaps a dozen, or 13 presidents who qualify as pretty darn good, which is a huge hit list in terms of history. You look at most democracies in the world, or you look into, given the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, you can find many 200-year periods there where they haven't got a single guy on the hit list. So I think we need perspectives that will allow us to look at current events in ways that will counteract the weight of the spin doctors and the politicians.
Maybe you'd like to have a chance and try out your thoughts on Tom or the panel. Forgive me, since I don't know you, I'm going to stab and say you. Anybody like to ask a question? Go right ahead.
Yeah, it strikes me that what you're offering is a cultural critique more than anything, because of your reference both to Scandinavia and to the idea that maybe the United States kind of appeal to ignorance. And I'm just wondering if you see that as perhaps being the root of the problem.
Well, I think it is a cultural critique, and I just want to say to you that although most of the discussion here has been about politics, the book is not principally about politics at all. It's a lot more about education, and a lot more about the education that takes place outside of our walls, having to do with Sly Stallone teaching us how to speak, and Matt Drudge, and oh, I don't know, one of the newer rock groups, and if you listen to Rosie O'Donnell's show, you won't find many politicians on it, but you will find many arbiters of taste and many people who are teaching us by example how to speak. To me, there's virtually nothing as inarticulate as a movie star in general and a movie star flacking their current movie. It's really rather remarkable because you watch them on the screen and they're speaking lines and it comes out so well and all of that, and then you see them in these situations and they're really bad. And the only people who can compete with them in that department are the people who get more airtime than anybody. And who is that? That's the sports stars, right? The basketball players, baseball, football, whatever happens to be in season. You know, the reporter shoves a microphone into his or her face while they're all sweaty, trying to get undressed, trying to come down, get rid of the adrenaline of the game and say, what do you think of the state of the world and your chances for the championship? And I can tell you that you can sit there and can write the remarks that these people are going to say because we're not giving them the right challenge at the right time, but we are giving them an awful lot of airtime. So we're saying, okay, you teach us how to speak. I have a son who's now 17 and a half, and now taller than I am, but his first few words, he didn't learn to speak till he was about 2 years old. His first few words were very interesting. Among them were pause and eject. Because he liked to work with the VCR a lot. And the other, because we live in the inner city and he walked along 14th Street, was check it out, only $1. And then his first complete sentence, according to his mother, I was not there, not present at the time, was, "No way do that, Mommy." Okay. So that's my point here, is that we learn from a lot of things that are outside the classroom, from people and places and things that are not necessarily articulate, and we need somehow to balance that in order to be able to use our own heritage. I mean, the English language is our common heritage. one of the wonderful things that happened to me when I was in the hospital was to watch and listen to everybody around me. And I counted 18 different nationalities on the floor between various phases of nurses and nurses' aides and helpers and this and that, about 14 different shades of skin color. And what do they have in common? They were all speaking English. They had to speak English because it was the only language they all had in common, and because it was a necessity, an absolute necessity for these people to communicate to one another and for them to get and to hold a job, and a good job. And this is a wonderful thing. This is our common heritage, and the only way we can use it is to fully use it. If you're going to be restricted to 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 words in a vocabulary, which is about the vocabulary that you have in what's called the ESL, the English as a Second Language textbook, then you're going to be limited. You're not going to be able to say words like sympathetic. It's kind of an ordinary word that we use every day. We can use that word readily in conversation because it's in our vocabularies. We are able to call it up quickly in the short-term memory. We've got maybe 15,000 words in what I would call the long-term memory. When you're searching for a word, your brain goes whir, 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 whir. And when you're sitting there talking to somebody, your computer doesn't work fast enough. But when you're sitting and writing, if you spend 10 minutes looking for a word, it's okay, as long as you've got the right word. And I think we need to try and have more of that writing-based language in our spoken language, and we'll all be the better for it.
Any more questions? Yes, in the back.
My biggest problem is that we spend so much time trying to communicate with each other, and it's this effort to try to communicate that keeps our vocabulary at the basic level. And as an example, we...
Could you speak a little louder? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Did you hear what I said in the beginning? Yeah. Okay. And then we had a Judicial Council member interview to try to select a Judicial Council member, and he used such incredible vocabulary. He'd be using good vocabulary. So we actually came to the decision for this person, and we decided not to select him because he would be speaking above everyone else that they would not even be able to understand. He would not be able to make a point.
In my terms, that would not be articulate speech, because articulate speech has to take into consideration who the audience is and what you're going to say to them. If you're speaking in a vocabulary that goes beyond people, then you're not really communicating with them. So to me, that's putting on airs, and I don't see any necessity to do that. On the other hand, I don't see any necessity to speak down to the audience. There's a wonderful story that I tell in the book, which happened to a friend of mine. His name was Maxine Herman. I didn't use her name in the book, but she's a great, wonderful lady, one of these people with hair that can't be contained. And she was a novelist, and she moved out to California to be with another friend of mine who's a screenwriter named Phil Messina. Phil has just completed a film which will be coming out shortly. It's called something like With Friends Like These. Anyway, Maxine had written a couple of spec scripts, and she got a job some of them were sold to television, and she got a job on a sitcom. And she goes in, and it's $10,000 a week, people. That's a lot of money. $10,000 a week, 13 weeks, not bad. So you don't want to throw this away too easily either. So she goes into the first meeting, the story conference at the beginning of the summer when things are going to get going. And she's a wonderful person, a former actress, and tremendously intelligent, and she has great ideas. And so she starts spewing out ideas and characters and all of this stuff. And the executive producer says, Maxine, hold on. He said, this is television. Aim lower. And she's never forgotten that, neither have I. And I think this is the terrifying thing that a lot of people do. I think Mr. Clinton is doing it. He's aiming lower. I think a lot of our politicians do it. But I also think a lot of broadcasters are doing it too. They assume that the audience cannot accept things on the level that they would like to speak on, and that they have to aim lower in order to hit a broader audience. I accept Mr. Dean to my left here on this basis, but there are an awful lot of people who do this. You can't tell me Howard Stern is aiming higher. And by the same token, you can't tell me that Rush Limbaugh is aiming higher either, because it's very clear that he's not. But we don't have to do that. We don't have to speak to the people that we are talking to in a way that aims lower. You don't even have to aim lower when you're talking to your children. And you shouldn't even have to do it when you're talking to your teachers. So I think the need is to communicate properly on the right level. So I think you were right in rejecting the person who was trying to give himself or herself airs by talking over your head. But the real objective is to try to talk to people on a level on which they are and where you can meet them and possibly even bring them up a bit if it's in your ability to do that.
Tom, you're talking about the lack of role models. We don't have a Churchill anymore. And
we also don't have a church anymore, which is a big problem. We heard a lot of articulate speak in the church, as Dr. will tell us, and we don't have church leaders. I'm sorry, I sort of interrupted.
we do need role models, but
Yeah.
who elects a Dan Rather? Who elects a sports star? Who elects a politician? Who elects a movie star as being the role model?
I mean,
It's almost like asking a person a question, answering it for them, and saying they're wrong. I've just told you you're a role model. Why are you speaking so poorly?
I think with politicians we can at least expect a little better, and we do elect them. The others, it's more difficult to say. But if I were a Hollywood star, and you can bet your last dollar that I shall never be one, I think you are obliged to prepare better than a lot of these stars do for the appearances that they do have. I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true of sports people, because most sports people, their talent is not necessarily in the area of articulateness. I think here we have a social problem where we're giving more airtime than I think is required to people there. I'm perfectly happy to watch people play their game, but I'm not happy necessarily hear them speak, because I think they're doing nobody a service by that.
Good question on the culture, and very especially on speaking too high. Yes, sir.
Yes, I had a question. First off, I must apologize that I've only read the introduction.
Could you speak a little louder also?
I've only read the introduction to your book for our class so far, so I'm
That's
just
all.
going to
Forget
base
the
my
rest.
question on that. My question is, you seem to be so concerned about the means which speech is delivered. You say that we should speak more eloquently, we should make sure that people understand us. I had the opportunity to attend a lecture last week, which was given by Dr. Dyson. He was an African-American speaker talking about the male perspective, and in it he admitted and would make up words. He would speak, he would go from ranging from ebonics up to philosophical type quotes. And his basic principle or belief was that as long as you understood what I'm saying, shouldn't that be what's being focused on? And I think that's my question. If I turn on a TV and see a comedian who was maybe raised in the ghetto speaking in ebonics or some other type of language, but I laugh at his jokes because I understand them, even though I might have had to not be at the same, I might be at a higher level, haven't I accomplished the same purpose? And isn't that what we should focus on when we're communicating? The ends, that you understand what I'm saying, and not the means that we're using better English or whatever else.
I'm not sure I really understand the question, but I'll try. I think that if the comedian is making you laugh,
Right.
then the comedian is communicating clearly and well. If the speaker that you heard last week is making up words, but you understand the word that he's made up, if I say a word, Hollywooditis, which doesn't exist, you know what I mean. We have common ground to understand that. I don't think there's any reason to try and make a word or make 4 words that will say that 1 word better. However, since we have 500,000 words at our disposal, we ought to be able to find more that exist that can do the job. I think we all make up phrases or words or things, or imbue existing phrases with additional meanings in order to make our conversation clear. We have words coming into the language at a fantastic rate. Something like maybe 1,000 a year. They come in a very interesting way. They come in from specific contexts like jazz or nuclear physics, or the way in which people relate to one another in a particular subculture. And they work into the mainstream by means of the media. And then they take on additional meaning. And finally, some lexicographer somewhere says, I better put that in the next dictionary. So new words are being created all the time. And if somebody puts in Hollywooditis, remember you heard it here first. But it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I mean, communication is really the essence of the game, not sticking to the script, if you will, of what's already existing.
Your question had to do with communication. You said that you agree. Ellis, just a moment.
Well, no, can I just redirect then?
Sure.
Okay, I've got the general impression from listening to you and reading what I have that you've written, that you are upset with the fact that Dan Rather, for instance, is kind of shortening his sentence length, talking down to people, trying to, dumbing down his language, so to speak. Is that necessarily a bad thing if people can understand him and know what he's saying? He's gotten his point across. Is it bad that he's dumbed it down, really?
Well, I don't know that he's gotten his point across. I think he speaks in headline and likes to do that. And he speaks in dumb country boy metaphor, which is not always a great thing to do for those of us who are not dumb country boys. I mean, there must be other context that he could use for his metaphor. I know part of it is done in an effort to cram more into the broadcast, but I don't think that that's necessarily helpful. Certainly you can headline a story, but if you report it in headline terms, I think you're not giving us the benefit. He doesn't talk in headlines when he's talking in conversation. You talk to him off camera, you don't get that same headline speech. It's an affectation that I think is an unnecessary one.
You hit on it yourself, though. He's trying to get a large story count into a
Possibly so,
relatively
yeah.
short newscast. Ellis, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to make a quick response because you've sort of challenged the professor in me as well as the author here. And I think a simple answer is that although creativity is perfectly in order at times, and one may be able to communicate without necessarily adhering to the rules, if you are trying to communicate to other people, it seems to me that you ought to adopt a form of communication that would have the highest chance of being understood by other people, which is more than likely going to be the common accepted way of speaking. I mean, you might be able to communicate by using some other way, but the point is you are certainly undercutting or reducing your chances of communicating effectively if you get too creative, so to speak.
You narrow the audience.
And you automatically are narrowing the audience. So.
David?
Now, there's a book in the field of preaching and religion that has a strong analog here. It's called How to Reach Out Without Dumbing Down. And the basic message of that book is that ministries which do not change, which remain at let's say a high church, sophisticated, stuffy level, are the empty churches. But the churches that reach out with more common language, more popular music, and so forth, that pack the churches are more open to theological criticism. And I think the basic issue we're talking here about is how to reach out without dumbing down. In politics, for example, the stations that are reaching out are the ones that are talking about Monica Lewis. The stations that are seeing declining viewership are the ones that have the responsible documentaries. The basic issue we all have is how to reach out without dumbing down.
This is an instance of Gresham's law, which is that the bad pushes out the good. But somehow we have to manage to push back. And I don't know exactly all of the ways that we can do that, but part of it has to do with pushing oneself. It's sometimes a lot easier to watch things that are simple, or listen to them that are simple, and rather than pushing yourself to try and get something that might be a little difficult to do. But you'd rather be, I think, on the upward spiral than on the downward spiral. I have a partner of mine who's going to be on Oprah Winfrey sometime in the late spring, and we may try a Trojan horse mission here, because I'm trying to get her to do a word a day, or maybe even a word a week or so, and just try and sort of ratchet up the ladder to counteract the kind of ratcheting down the ladder. And Oprah of late has taken it upon herself to have a book club and to do other things that seem to have objectives other than broadening and widening her audience. So maybe there's hope yet. But you're correct, I think, in saying that people who reach out in broadcasting are staying on the air or in the pulpit. I don't know that it necessarily at the expense of those who are doing or producing or saying things that are high quality. I'm not sure that those things are in any sort of equilibrium.
Any other questions out here? Yes.
I just got a comment, just hoping to counter comment. Herman Melville wrote the short novel Billy Budd about 150 years ago or so, and the title character got into a barroom brawl and killed somebody with bare hands. And towards the end of the trial in New England, the judge asked him, "Why'd you do it? Why did you kill this man with your bare hands?" And Billy Budd, standing in front of the court and standing in front of the judge, said, "Because he insulted me, and I didn't know what to say back."
What did he say back?
He said he didn't know what to say back.
He didn't know what to say.
And that's why he killed him.
I think that's true. I think there is a connection, and I don't know if we can document it too pretty well, between inarticulateness and level of violence in the society. If we need to express ourselves, or if we cannot express ourselves in words, if we can express ourselves in argument, then we may not need to use our fists. But I don't know that there's any way either to document that or to reverse it. We see it in prison, though. When you go into prisons and work there, the things that seem to turn people around the most is not only the process of education, which might allow them to get a job, but the process of education that allows them to argue with people rather than to short-circuit the argument. To do something that's other than use physical action to obtain what it is that they want. I think you also see this in the transitions that happen in kindergarten, where kids are really at different levels of development, physiological development, and that some are able to talk and talk well enough to get what they want, and others are not. This is part of what happens in the stage of development called the terrible twos, which I think should be the terrible 2, 3, 4s, and 5, actually, because to my mind, it really only begins to be over when a child can ask for what he or she wants and be able to understand it in verbal terms.
In practical use, there are really only 2 points of view. Your point of view and the point of view that no rational, thinking, intelligent human being could possibly hold. The problem is that sometimes, thank you, you can't pull out the exact, precise word that will buttress your argument to prove that you have the better position and theirs is worthless.
Oh, I always can, the next day.
So as a
I think the way you do it is you repeat your argument louder.
well, I had a friend who went to Quebec, and they speak French in Quebec almost militantly, and he asked how much the room was, and he didn't get a response. How much is the? Well, it just doesn't work that way. You can't assume somebody who doesn't understand you is deaf. But again, isn't it what you're after is using language so as to persuade someone to your point of view, and using less than adequate might not do that. Any other questions? Yes.
There seems to be a clash between the norm and our culture expects our politicians to, how they expect them to perform, and how we expect a sports athlete to respond to something. And there's a clash between that and articulateness in general. And I was wondering, and that seems to be the spiral, I think. I was wondering, Mr. Shachtman, if you saw any one critical incident that
I think we
keep that
have
spiral
today
going?
more politicians who are poll-driven than conscience-driven. And I would prefer it the other way around. If somebody is taking or advocating legislative action based on a particular stance of conscience, I might disagree with that person, but I can certainly respect them. I have less respect for somebody who says, well, the polls say that people are interested in anti-burglary devices. Now this politician may know that in statistical terms, burglary affects 2% of the people per year. And that what's really important is school reform. And they may have a particular point of view on that, but they're going to say something about burglary reform because that's what the polls suggest that they ought to do in order to keep a high profile with the electorate and court re-election. What can you do about that? That's the real problem. And the real problem may be that articulate behavior of itself is no antidote to this, that you may have to reform the system. But if, as Lou points out, we have very few heroes of articulation, what are we going to do to promote that promote generating such people? And I think, first of all, it's to persuade politicians that speaking their conscience will have fewer deleterious consequences for them. That it's not such a hardship to lose a race if you have gone into the race saying what you believe, and in other people that there's a reason to be eloquent, that it will get you something. Maybe it'll only be some attention, but that may be enough. What is it that we want to lead us? I think it is people with vision, and the vision has to be articulated somehow, or else it's no good. It doesn't exist unless somebody else has become privy to it, either through writing or through speech. I'm reminded by some of my recent reading that Jefferson hated to speak in public, thought he was very bad at it, and had a terrible voice. And when he delivered this wonderful first inaugural address, it could only be heard for about 2 or 3 rows past the podium because he was such a lousy speaker. And when it came time for him to deliver his, I think it's the first annual message to Congress, somewhere around December of 1801, he put it in writing and sent it up. He didn't want to speak it. But nonetheless, at that time we had a culture where this message was instantly printed in toto, without cuts, in virtually every broadside and newspaper around. So it was accessible to the people that he was really trying to reach, which is the audience outside of the politicians, or I should say, in addition to the people who held political office. So we always have the need of being able to reach people. And Al Smith, the governor of New York, was one of the first people to become completely beguiled by radio in the early 1920s. And he considered himself to be a writer and liked to write things. And he said, but you know, he said, I can go around and deliver a speech every night to an audience of 1,000 people for a month. And in one night on the radio, I can reach 3 million people in a half an hour. That's power. And we have to be able to use that power. And the people who have access to those microphones today are using it in ways that have very little to do with articulate speech, and very often not very much to do about conscience and about the affairs of the heart that moral affairs of the heart that are at the seat of all great speech.
That was a good question that brought forth a very good answer. We have time for one more. Yes.
At what point in our history do you think that our articulate speech began to fade, and why do you think that happened?
It may be with the introduction of radio. I'm not really clear about that. I don't think anybody can say. But the introduction of radio and the introduction of speech writing on a wholesale basis in politics coming around the same time. There's also the fact that our presidents and the rest of our political people talk too much. Jimmy Carter was the first one who did it, right? One speech a day for 4 years. That's too much. I mean, you couldn't write a speech a day and say something different and interesting, and neither could he, and neither could anybody. I mean, if you're going to make, as Franklin Roosevelt did, 3, 4, 6, 8 addresses a year, you can make certain that each one will have something to say. But if you've got to be on the radio 3 times a week with something approaching a column, or you have to be a politician who got to make a different speech every day, as all presidents since the mid-1970s have done, there's just too much to be said, and you have to have too many hands working at it. Walter Lippmann said, having somebody write your speech is like having somebody else write your love letter. And I don't think we want to do that. But that's the culture that we've evolved. So I think it would be great if presidents would say, I'm only going to speak twice a month, and there will only be one press conference per month, or something like that. And to sort of wind down the apparatus which of the daily news briefing and the daily speeches, which put, in a certain sense, too much pressure on our elected officials, and which damp down the quality of that they have to talk about.
I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank Tom Shachtman, of course. Tom will stay around for a few moments. I want to thank you for getting involved in this and thinking about it. You're invited to stay. There's refreshments in the back. Tom will be signing books over here, and you're invited to chat.
You can talk to me even if you don't have a book to sign.